In the year 2024, an elderly man from northern England was admitted to the hospital with an unusual and life-threatening condition. He was suffering from a flesh-eating infection, but the cause of the illness remained a mystery. One thing was clear: it was not a coincidence. In the following months, investigators began to unravel the case, which would soon be described as the most sophisticated murder plot in English history. On January 22, 2024, 71-year-old Patrick O'Hara went to the emergency room of the Royal Victoria Hospital in his hometown of Newcastle upon Tyne. He complained of severe pain in his upper arm, particularly at the injection site where he had received the COVID-19 booster shot a few hours earlier. The medical staff initially assumed that his condition had been caused by a botched injection. He was prescribed antibiotics and pain medication and sent home with advice to monitor the condition of his arm. However, it only got worse. A few hours later, his hand was covered in blisters and had severe discoloration. The next day, Patrick returned to the hospital. The doctors were puzzled by the rapid deterioration of his condition. Blood tests were performed, but they yielded no conclusive results. Over time, it became clear that Patrick was suffering from necrotizing fasciitis, an infection that destroys tissue. The focus of the lesion was in the area of the injection site. The suspected vaccine was most likely not a vaccine at all but a toxin injected into his body, which caused the devastating effects. To slow the spread of the infection and save Patrick's life, the infected tissue was surgically removed. In the meantime, specialists tried to determine what substance had caused his condition. If the doctors knew what kind of poison they were dealing with, they could develop a more effective treatment plan. Finally, Dr. Emmett, an expert in this field, suggested that iodomethane, a highly toxic substance, could have been the cause. Contact with this substance leads to burns and blisters similar to those observed on Patrick. Previously, no case was known in which iodomethane had been injected into humans, which makes its use particularly dangerous. The substance is practically undetectable in the body. On January 22, the day Patrick felt unwell, a nurse came to his home around 10 a.m. The nurse, Rush Patel, was supposed to conduct an examination and was sent to the house where Patrick lived with his partner, Jenny. The man, who spoke with an Asian accent and in broken English, seemed somewhat awkward but still gave the impression of a competent professional. The visit lasted about 40 minutes. During this time, he also took blood and urine samples from Patrick. Jenny, Patrick's partner of 20 years, came downstairs during the nurse's visit to ask questions about her health. She asked for her blood pressure to be measured, and Rush Patel agreed. Then he began preparations for the COVID-19 booster shot. Patrick pointed out that he had already received a booster shot less than 3 months ago, but the nurse insisted that another one was necessary. When Rush Patel administered the medication, Patrick felt a sharp and intense pain, cried out, and flinched. Rush reassured him, saying that this was a normal reaction and the pain would soon subside. After the injection, however, the nurse abruptly stood up, quickly packed his instruments, and left the house, which Patrick found suspicious. In the hospital where Patrick was admitted to the intensive care unit, the doctors noticed one of several letters he and Jenny had recently received. With the letter in hand, they informed the couple that there was no local nursing team and they had not hired a nurse named Rush Patel. The letter was a forgery and the healthcare worker was an imposter. The forgery was cleverly done. The logo was pasted in the top corner and there were hyperlinks. The letter was written in medical language and contained personal notes on data protection, which are commonly found in informal emails. The next letter, sent at the beginning of the month, followed the same pattern. It contained a QR code that led to a short health questionnaire. The letter also offered a date and time for a home visit, January 22, between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. The day before, Patrick had received an SMS from an unknown number. It was a reminder of his visit, supposedly from Pytel healthcare provider. Patrick only suspected something was wrong when Rush became nervous after giving him the injection. One statement in particular was alarming. It was a statement from his partner, Jenny. As Rush left the house, Jenny came back down the stairs and said in passing to Mr. Pytel, "You are as tall as my son." Upon hearing this, Patrick jumped up and ran after him, but it was too late. The Northumbrian police began to trace the nurse's path from Patrick's apartment in Newcastle city centre. Surveillance cameras in the city center showed the man driving to a hotel in a car with fake license plates and checking into a room. The man checked into the hotel under a false name. 2 hours after his arrival, he left the room again. This time, he was wearing a long coat and a flat cap. He had blue disposable gloves on his hands and a medical mask over his face. He left the room, walked through the hotel lobby, and exited the building. It was less than a 10-minute walk from the hotel to Patrick and Jenny's house on St. Thomas Street. License plates on UK roads correspond to both the make and model of the vehicle to which they are assigned. The nurse's license plates were easily recognizable as fake. They matched the make of the vehicle but not the model. Nevertheless, investigators were able to trace the vehicle's path that morning to the hotel and back to its starting point. The trail led them to the small town of Ingleby Barwick, south of Newcastle in Stockton, where the car departed from the house of Dr. Thomas Kwan, Jenny Young's son. Jenny had several sons from her first marriage, but it was her eldest son, 53-year-old Thomas Kwan, to whom she noted a resemblance to the mysterious nurse. Thomas was born in Hong Kong but moved to the United Kingdom 39 years ago when he was 13 years old. His parents sent him to an English boarding school. Thomas subsequently studied medicine at Newcastle University. He became a general practitioner and partner at the Happy House Clinic in Sunderland, a city about a half-hour drive from his mother's home. Thomas's relationship with his mother was strained, apparently due to his parents' divorce 27 years prior. Many of Tom's problems with his mother seemed to be financial. He believed that Jenny had withdrawn $1 million from his parents' joint account before their separation and then forced her husband into a divorce. Years later, when his father died, Thomas found another reason for his discontent. In the will, he was allocated a smaller share of the inheritance than his younger brother. Thomas later wrote to his mother, stating that he believed she had acted unjustly, accused her of stealing from his father, and asked her to correct it. He demanded an explanation for the changes in the will and accused Jenny of betrayal. Patrick, trying to calm the situation, asked Thomas to leave the house, but Thomas pushed him and continued his emotional monologue. Jenny called the police and Thomas was forced to leave the house before they arrived. This incident left a deep mark on the relationship between mother and son. Since then, Thomas has had little contact with Jenny and is no longer allowed to visit her. When the police investigated the incident with the fake nurse, Thomas Kwan's name emerged during the analysis of the route. The vehicle the nurse used was recorded on surveillance cameras as it drove from Newcastle to Ingleby Barwick, directly to Thomas's house. This information prompted investigators to turn their attention to the doctor. It seemed strange to them that the vehicle involved in the crime had been sighted directly in front of his house. The police requested data on Thomas Kwan and discovered his strained relationship with his mother. It soon also became known that there was a conflict related to the will, which could have been the motive. Investigators found out that Thomas had purchased chemicals, including toxic reagents that could have been used to produce the substance that caused Patrick's illness. These purchases, made over the internet, became a crucial part of the case. With the court's permission, the police searched Thomas's apartment. In his garage, packages of chemicals and laboratory-like equipment were found. They also found a range of medical supplies, syringes, shoes, and protective masks on Thomas's computer. The police found search terms related to toxic substances and their use. Among the documents was also a file with forged National Health Service forms that matched those Patrick and Jenny had received. Further investigations revealed that Thomas had planned the crime long before its execution. He used his medical knowledge and access to resources to create a convincing fake nursing record. He knew how to talk, how to look, and what documents to present. His hasty departure after the injection and other mistakes, however, raised doubts. The police arrested Thomas Kwan on February 15, 2024. Upon his arrest, he denied guilt, claiming he had nothing to do with Patrick's poisoning. The evidence against him, however, became increasingly clear. Thomas was charged with attempted murder, and the parties began to prepare for trial. Thomas used his medical reputation and knowledge to create an appearance of professionalism. He manipulated the entire system so that no one suspected a problem until it was too late. During the search of his apartment, the police found not only chemicals and instructions, but also a complete kit for producing poison. This included, among other things, measuring devices, protective suits, and laboratory containers. This confirmed the investigators' suspicion that Thomas had been preparing his act for a long time, collecting materials and studying their properties. On Thomas's mobile phone, numerous internet queries about poisons and their use were found. He searched for information on how ricin can be used to kill slowly and painfully. His search queries included terms like ricinization, duration of the poison's effect, and effects of cyanide on the human body. This demonstrates his intention to think everything through as thoroughly as possible and avoid mistakes. However, Thomas made some errors that helped investigators uncover his plan. By using a fake license plate on his car, he tried, among other things, to conceal his identity. But the police quickly determined that the license plate did not match the car model. Furthermore, his disguise as a nurse was not perfect. Jenny's remark that he resembled her son was the first signal of suspicion. His hasty departure from the house after the injection and his subsequent behavior were also suspicious. Found toxicology books and instructions for making poisons strengthened the case against Thomas. Additionally, a copy of the National Center for Policing Excellence's Manual for Murder Cases was found on his computer. This was a document that could have helped the perpetrator avoid planning errors. Everything indicated that Thomas wanted to carry out the murder with maximum precision and minimal probability of being caught. Particularly frightening was the way he manipulated his family. The emails sent, the text messages, and the overall persona as a nurse showed that Thomas was prepared to do anything to gain access to his mother's house. For the neighbors who observed the massive search, it was a real shock, as it seemed inconceivable that a doctor, a man who should be saving lives, could be involved in such a cruel crime. When Thomas was arrested, he continued to deny everything. However, the collected evidence, chemicals, laboratory equipment, books, and digital records painted an undeniable picture of his guilt. The investigation revealed that he had acted with cold-blooded calculation, using his knowledge and resources to commit the worst of all: intentional poisoning with intent to kill. He refused to plead guilty to attempted murder. The collected evidence, including his internet research, the chemicals found, and the documents created, however, strongly indicated his involvement. The police also found out that Thomas had spied on his mother and her partner for an extended period. Spyware installed on a donated laptop allowed him to monitor their daily lives, read emails, and track financial transactions in real time. He took screenshots and saved correspondence to confirm his suspicions that the family was mismanaging the family's money. Particularly shocking was that Thomas drafted several alternative murder plans before settling on his role as a nurse. One of them involved sending poisoned drinks or food under the pretext of membership in a fictitious northern wine tasting club. Another involved offering free lunches through a fictitious organization. These machinations show how far he was willing to go to realize his plan. When Thomas created the identity of the nurse Rush Patel, he made a fake ID card with his own photo, a wig, and a stick-on beard. He not only had a well-elaborated persona, but also props to back it up in case of questions. In the 40 minutes he spent in the house, he even managed to deceive his own mother by pretending to be a caring healthcare worker. This story sent shockwaves through everyone who knew Thomas. The patients who consulted him were stunned to learn that their doctor was involved in such a crime. Many said that the trust a man in a doctor's uniform inspires had been ruthlessly exploited. The residents of their neighborhood watched in horror as the investigation engulfed their quiet suburb. While Patrick lay in intensive care, doctors fought for his life. He had to undergo several operations to remove dead tissue and prevent further spread of the infection. Plastic surgery was also required to repair the affected areas on his arm. Fortunately, Patrick survived, although he still has a long road to full recovery. Thomas Kwan, who was arrested, refused to cooperate with the medical team trying to find out what substance had been injected into Patrick. This could have expedited his treatment, but Thomas chose to remain silent, which only strengthened the suspicion of his deliberate desire to inflict maximum harm. The investigation revealed that iodopamine, a toxic substance Thomas had carefully studied before the act, was most likely used. Despite attempts to deny the allegations, the evidence against Thomas Kwan was overwhelming. Internet orders, toxicological material, the found chemicals, the murder plans, and the fact that the espionage program had been carried out made his guilt obvious. The trial promised to be a high-profile event and a symbol of how far a person driven by greed and a desire for control can go. Thomas Kwan argued in court that his actions were not aimed at murder. He stated he had only intended to cause minor pain or discomfort. However, his trial began in October 2024 before the Newcastle Crown Court, where this claim was quickly refuted by the collected evidence. In his opening statement, prosecutor Peter Makepeace pointed out to the jury that truth is sometimes indeed stranger than fiction. He emphasized that Kwan's meticulous, detailed preparation showed that his intent was far more serious than he claimed. Kwan's knowledge of poisons, his research, and his accumulated experience left no doubt that he was aware of the life-threatening nature of his actions. Kwan's motive, however, was not solely financial. Although the amount he stood to inherit after the division of assets between him and his family was relatively small, his resentment ran deeper. Kwan claimed his mother had not loved him enough as a child, and the attack on Patrick, her partner, was a form of revenge, a way to hurt his mother emotionally. On the second day of the trial, October 7, 2024, Kwan pleaded guilty, thus sparing the court weeks of hearings. The victim, Patrick O'Hara, spoke about the impact of the attack on his life. The sentence for Kwan was harsh, reflecting the severity of his crime and the degree of premeditation. The judge noted that while some aspects of Kwan's plan were unsophisticated, such as the fake license plates on the car that did not match the vehicle model, he had invested considerable effort in preparing the plan. The judge emphasized that Thomas's actions were carefully thought out and planned, justifying a significant increase in his sentence. Thomas Kwan received a prison sentence of 31 years and 5 months. His guilty plea and the fact that he had no prior convictions were taken into account during sentencing. Patrick O'Hara has made a full physical recovery. His mental health, however, has suffered. He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, which also led to the failure of his long-term relationship with Jenny. Despite everything, Patrick expressed his gratitude to the real healthcare professionals who saved his life. After the trial, Patrick's life slowly returned to normal. Physical and emotional traumas, however, reminded him of his experiences. What had happened was a starting point for new endeavors for him. Without Jenny, from whom he had separated, he moved from Newcastle to a quiet coastal town where he could find peace of mind. Despite all adversities, Patrick did not withdraw into himself. He became involved in organizations that advocate for victims of abuse and fraud. He began speaking at conferences and in the media, telling his story and warning people about the importance of being vigilant, even in the most mundane situations. Meanwhile, Jenny, who was devastated by her son's actions and her feelings of guilt towards Patrick, struggled to rebuild her relationships with her other children. She withdrew from public life to focus on rebuilding her family, but her relationship with Thomas was never restored. Only in prison did Thomas Kwan become aware of the severity of his actions. In isolation, he was forced to confront his motives and the destruction he had inflicted on his own family. According to prison psychologists, however, he had a long road of remorse ahead of him, and at the beginning of his sentence, he still tried to justify his actions with a sense of injustice. As a man who had been through fire and water, Patrick found happiness in simple pleasures, walks by the sea and friendships with people who valued him for who he was. He often said that the greatest victory in his life was learning to trust again. And although the scars on his arm never healed, he learned to see them not as a reminder of the pain, but as a symbol that even in the most difficult circumstances, one can find the strength to carry on. Thank you for watching and take care.